What's up, friends? Welcome back to Rooted Wisconsin, where we are dedicated to authentically sharing the stories of the fantastic people that drive Wisconsin culture and make this an awesome place to be. Start this episode off the same way we always do. Thank you. Thank you for liking, subscribing, that social media share, whatever you do to engage with us. We truly appreciate you. We make the content for you, wouldn't be here without you, and appreciate you coming along for the ride. So thanks for being there. A couple shout outs we kick off the show with as well. Rooted Wisconsin brought to you by Riverside Pizzeria. Next time you're in Green Bay, they're in Ashwaubenon. You don't want to miss out on the best pizza in Wisconsin. Stop in and say hi to Ryan and the whole team in there and get yourself some delicious Riverside. The secret to know about Riverside is to make sure you order cheese out. So I won't explain it, but you got to find out. You got to go to Riverside, get cheese out. And for those of you that know the original up in Iron River in the UP, people have been getting cheese out forever. Stop in Riverside, get your cheese out, and tell them Rooted Wisconsin sent you. So big thanks to Ryan and the team. I've talked about it several times, but for them putting their faith in us in an early time in the podcast and putting their faith in our content and just what we're trying to achieve here in our mission at Rooted Wisconsin. So appreciate Ryan and the team, and get yourself a Riverside pizza. You definitely won't regret that. And then shout out to our friends at Discover Green Bay for some awesome studio space here in the shadows of Titletown. So always super happy to be here as well. Now that we got that all out of the way, our guest today, Alexis Arnold. Thanks for coming in, Alexis.
Hi, thanks for having me. I'm curious about the cheese out now. I don't know about this secret.
So the cheese out.
You don't have to explain it.
Oh, I will.
Okay,
I will. I try to condense the intro, but still make it thorough. You know,
yeah.
Tough to do.
Absolutely.
But cheese out is they cook the pizza as normal, and then when they take it out, there's another layer of cheese added that kind of melts to the perfect consistency.
Interesting. Okay, good to know.
It's fantastic. Have you had it yet?
I have not. Pizza? I mean, now I'm going to add it to the list. So yeah, you piqued my curiosity. I'm like, what is this cheese out thing?
It's way too good.
I love it.
It's way too good.
Only in Wisconsin, right?
Yeah. So I've been training myself all week before coming up to this. In my brain, I keep wanting to say the art collective.
Oh, yeah.
But it's the art connective.
Absolutely, right? Yeah. Really about connecting people to the arts, and then also obviously connecting artists, right, to different opportunities and also helping them. So yeah, I feel like I'm that connecting point.
Mm-hmm. Is that kind of where the name of it started?
Absolutely. Absolutely. It didn't start out like that. So kind of the origin story is I took over an existing gallery that was named Artless Bastard. So obviously unique name, right, in itself. And I ran it as that for a little bit, but it was kind of always in the back of my mind to go nonprofit. And that's not the best name for a nonprofit. Let's just be realistic, right? Yeah. And so as I was transitioning through all of that, that's where Art Connective came, because I realized I was really this connecting point.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So, and I assumed as much. And
yeah.
That's why I've been training so hard, because from the first time I saw it, for some reason, my brain just wants to say collective, and I had
It's okay. You're not the only one. It's totally fine. I get it. It's totally fine. Yeah.
Nice. Well, I appreciate you taking some time to chat. I'm excited. Excited to talk about the arts and just your journey there. So, how did you land there? What led up to that? Where'd you start? A lot of people have a really easily rememberable entrance into the arts, right? Like you've always wanted it. Where did your interest in action, I guess, start in the arts?
It goes way, way, way back to receiving a film camera for Christmas. I honestly don't remember what age. I think I was in grade school. And that camera really launched my love into photography. So I really I'm a photographer in my soul, have been professional photographer for many years. And decided to get a fine art degree. Looking back, maybe not the best decision. I ended up at UW Stout for that. Really great program. That's in Menominee, Wisconsin, for those that aren't familiar. Really great professors at the time that I was there. Fortunate to have them. And then from there was just, ended up in the Twin Cities, ended up working in a photo lab. It was film back then. That's going to date me, obviously. Then from there, I love the Twin Cities. I really love St. Paul. The weather just pushed me out. Like, unfortunately, the winters there were just really rough during that time.
Pushed you right out to Green Bay.
No, pushed me out west. Yeah, no, I went farther and ended up in Portland, Oregon, of all places. Never been before, and to me, that's my second home. I ended up being there for 15 years, and it was a really interesting ride. So
yeah. Okay.
Yeah. Okay. Going on. I was like, that's where I ended up working for a photographer out there. And that was really valuable, having that mentorship. And besides learning from him, he was part of a larger community of photographers that had 10, 20, 30 years of experience. So, as this fresh, art graduate who's wanting to pursue photography, I didn't realize at the time, but obviously looking back, that was such an amazing opportunity, right? Mm-hmm. To be around people who have already gone through it and to have them willing to share, willing to be open. And, I could pick up a phone to any of them and be like, oh my God, I'm dealing with this. Like, how do I handle this? Whether it was with a client or just with my practice. And I think we're kind of missing a lot of that today, right? That community in that sense, especially for the arts. Yeah, I don't know how you feel about that. Yeah.
Yeah, I would say so. I think what actually sticks out to me hearing the start of your story is the importance of art exposure, because yours started with getting a camera.
Yeah.
So I like to play music. I wonder how many musicians there are out there that didn't have a guitar put in their hands or a piano set in front of them.
Yeah.
Definitely as you move on, it's unique, right? Because there's in a lot of different realms, there's this competitive weird thing where like, oh my goodness, they might take some of the money I'm going to make, blah, blah, blah.
Yes.
But at the same time, there's value in that. There's such value in that community and conversation.
I mean, going back to what you just said, you really hit a nail on the head where I think because it's such a individual experience and journey, right? It's not like you have staff, right? Yeah. You're typically doing this alone. And because it does take quite a long time, right, to maybe reach a level of success. And that's going to be different for everybody, right? What they consider that to be. There is this feeling guarded, right? They like, I'm not going to share with you because I put in years and years and years to get to this point. Mm-hmm. That's going to fast track you to possibly get to where I'm at. You know what I mean? And so, yeah, unfortunately, I think in any creative field, there's a lot of people who feel that way, right? But on the flip side is when you do share your knowledge, right, whatever it is, with the generation, with the people who are coming up behind you, it's not hurting you, right? You're actually building whatever that sector is and you're making it stronger. And so you have to go into it with a mindset that there's enough for everyone, right? And there is enough for everyone. But yeah, it can definitely get very competitive. Yes.
Yeah. Gardens grow where you plant seeds.
Yes, absolutely.
I'm a firm advocate of that. Like just by nature, I like sharing things with people and watching people succeed.
Yes.
Yep. But that kind of resembles my early career path. I worked in broadcasting for a while, and there were a lot of that first person in there. Where, like, didn't share, the tricks behind the mic and stuff like that, because then it's like, well, somebody they probably look at it as, and in that industry, it's so like tumultuous, right? So I get it where like, oh, somebody younger that'll work for cheaper.
Right.
I don't want to teach them because then they're the,
yes,
they fill the seat. So kind of get it, but
and you have that, I think, in lots, like you said, like in your field, tons of different avenues, you have that kind of mentality, right? But the catch is, it's like the experience, right? It takes time, right, to learn those things. And it takes years, and it takes going through these ups and downs. And, I was given the opportunity where I still had to put in the time, I still had to put in the work, right? This isn't going to like fast track you like, oh, within a month, you're going to be like, just balling. It still doesn't work that way, because you still have to put in your own time, right? And your own effort, and build this business or entrepreneurship that works for you, right? Because if you're copying somebody, it's never going to work, right?
And another piece of that, kind of an interesting angle, I think, is from my experience, the people that have been the most willing to share are the ones that are really good at what they do, because they're confident in what they do. And I would assume that's the same in many of the art fields, where like if someone's really good at what they do, like they'll share because they're not worried about somebody nipping at their heels.
Yes and no. I think with the fine arts, it's just a really, how do I word this? I'm like, it's a little bonkers as far as that sector, right? And with the fine arts, referring to painters, people who are doing, ceramics, mixed media, whatever it is, it's already guarded, right? As far as, especially when you get into that gallery world. And I, from being just an artist and not knowing the inner workings of a gallery, right? Not owning one before, I had a lot of these misconceptions that artists have, right? And then I got into it, and I was it, right? I was literally owning and operating and providing these resources to artists. And that time period of, a little over 4 years was a huge eye opener for me, to realize, oh, okay, so artists are just not aware of a lot of like how to operate on this professional business level. And that's why I'm doing what I'm doing now, is during that time frame, there was all these real essentials that they were just missing. And I was getting frustrated as a gallery owner, like, why don't they know this, right? I mean, to the point where, I'd be like changing over a show, and I'd be swearing left and right, like, stuff's coming in and I can't hang it, and, it has no hardware on it. Maybe the frame's falling apart, or, they didn't pick up their artwork, like they're not communicating, you name it, like just basics, right? Well, it was that where I finally realized, oh, like it's not being taught, right? And so that's really kind of what helped me kind of pivot to where I'm at now with Art Connective, where, it's just giving it, education and giving back that mentorship that I received as an entrepreneur back to artists, but specifically for, that fine art field, which is, it has a couple nuances that are a little different.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah.
So what did that encompass or entail? I'm not that intimately aware of like that field in general. What does it mean to be an art gallery owner?
Really there's different types of galleries, right? So with any kind of business, whether it's nonprofit or for profit, it's still going to be run however the owner, wants to run it, right? So there's a lot of them obviously are showcasing art, right? That's what the gallery is meant. It's literally a brick and mortar building that's meant to display art. And
that's my picture of it.
Yes,
that's my mental image of what I imagine.
Absolutely. And with the goal of selling, right? Yeah. For artists, a lot of them, I think, have this idea that that's kind of the yellow brick road, right, to success, is working with or being in a gallery.
It's funny you use that reference because I think of it like you're Oz. Like you get to decide who's there.
But it's also, the artists, it's not as difficult, I think, as a lot of them make it to be, right? As far as getting into a gallery or working with galleries, there's lots of different ways. There's lots of different opportunities. And, one thing that I continued from the previous owners was just really giving emerging artists opportunities, because there are galleries that won't work with new artists, right? They want the one that's more established, that, has been doing it for 10 years, has already maybe a following, has a really cohesive style of work, where we were giving those that were new, all levels, that opportunity to show their work and possibly sell it. And you have to, right? You have to give opportunities at all different levels, right? In someone's career point. And yeah, it was a really interesting, learning point for me. And it helped me get back into my fine art, actually. So it was really good for that. Yeah.
So what is that? What is your central, what do you create? What is your central theme, or what do you?
Yeah. Well, I'm always going to be a photographer. I've been doing that for 20 plus years, but, obviously I have a fine art degree, and I kind of push that to the side a little bit to pursue photography. I'm back into working with mixed media. Specifically encaustics, but with a lot of other materials with that. So, and it's something that I was always drawn to, but I just never took the time to really pursue. And then, how the pandemic gave me time, right?
Stuck in the house.
Yeah. I'm like, okay. Yeah. So what's interesting about what I'm doing now with Art Connective is I'm implementing everything, right, that I've learned from having the gallery into my own practice, right? And then also taking a lot of things just from being an entrepreneur for so long, a lot of those just cross over, into it. And so it's kind of neat, because I feel like I'm on the same kind of journey with a lot of artists where we're growing at the same time.
Yeah.
Yeah, so that's fun.
That is fun.
Yeah.
So am I understanding it right? It seems like you're kind of in a mentorship situation. Would
Absolutely.
that be a good assessment?
Yep. Mentorship, coaching, cheerleader, right? Yeah. I always preference with, any kind of tips or advice, like take it or leave it, right? Take what you feel is going to work for you and then implement it into your business. Mm-hmm. And that advice was given to me at a very young age as a photographer, because you need to be, I think a lot of artists are so isolated in their practice and work, but you need to learn that entrepreneurial side, right? You need to learn how to run a business. You need to learn how this art world really works and operates. So going back to my personal experiences as a photographer, I did that right out the gate. I'm going to conferences, right, in Vegas, I'm attending as many seminars as I can, just trying to absorb as much information as possible. And a colleague, JP, I'll give you a shout out. He's out in Washington State. He already had 20 plus 30 years experience. And I remember, because he was still going to these conferences as well. And I was so overwhelmed, right? Because you have, 3 days and there's seminars, stacked on top of, each other. And you're like, which ones do I go to? And I will never forget it. He's like, Alexis, just, if you can go to the seminar, and he's like, if you can walk away with one tip or one piece of advice that you can implement into your business, he's like, it's worth it. You don't need 10 or 20 different things, just one. And I really try to remind my followers that, the advice I'm giving you have to make it your own, right? What is going to work for you? What is that thing that you're like, oh my God, I didn't think about that. Those are the things then you should follow and pursue and learn more about. So I really make sure I'm cautious, because there is no magic button.
Mm-hmm.
Right.
Yeah. And that conference strategy, I guess you would call it, is pretty common. So I've heard that same thing.
Yeah, it's a great tip, huh?
It really is, because in that environment, if you go to, it was generally 2 or 3 keynotes and then a bunch of breakout sessions that you can go into. And if you try to diligently take notes on everything, how many people go back over those notes? 0.
Yeah.
But if you remember one key piece, that's what I do when I go to those things, and it's really helpful.
Well, and it's so much information thrown at you.
Goodness,
I mean, it's overload, right? So it is hard to know.
And it's always something you're passionate about.
Yes.
So it's always like, this is cool. This is cool. This is cool.
Absolutely. Yeah, it is. It's just, it's so much stimulation. And I think, that's really important for artists to remember, right? What do you want your practice to look like? So many artists that I've met or talked to, they're missing that first step, right? What is your business going to look like? What do you want it to look like? Where do you want it to operate, right? How do you want it to operate? And there's more options than just this gallery, right? Obviously the gallery, model's just been, kind of pumped into our system for, centuries. And that's such a small sector for a lot of artists. And it's also not necessarily the best avenue to go, depending on what they create. So that's where I really start. Like, let's start at, square one, right? Who or what or where do you want to operate? So yeah,
that has to be just that concept has to be eye-opening to a lot of artists, and that's a great segue into one thing I was thinking about chatting about today. Because, so in my history, I come from a business and marketing background. It's
nice.
Very commonly dollars and cents, right? And how can I meet someone's unmet need and recuperate some money because of that?
Yeah.
That, when you think of the arts, I have to imagine that has to be a sticking point a lot of times, because a lot of times creation comes from a place of passion.
Absolutely. Yep.
But not so much what others need or want. It's something's got to come out of you and you want to make it and create it. What does the intersection of that look like, and how do you even coach around that? That's a deep topic.
Yeah, that's a really great great point to bring up, because that is that part that you just talked about, kind of that marketing and that business mind, it takes time to learn that, right? To being an entrepreneur, there's really no guidebook. It's you're winging it a lot of times. You are the marketing, right? You are the promotion. You are the artist, right? You are the sales. You're wearing all these multiple hats. And I think that's where a lot of artists are struggling, or what I've seen, right? From just communication and just, working with them one-on-one, is they're kind of like, that's kind of itchy to them, like, I don't want to do it, but they know they have to do it, but they're not sure where to start. And of course, every artist just wants to create, like, duh, yeah, like, of course, like, if you could just be sitting, in your studio creating day after day. But the reality for a lot of them is, in order to continue creating, right, there needs to be sales. And so, yeah, you have to kind of step back and you have to start dedicating time to just learning just some basics, and at least understanding that you need to put more energy into marketing. You need to put maybe some more energy into, like, again, how do you want your business to operate? Where do you want it to operate? What is your price point? Just because you're located, let's say here in Green Bay, this isn't necessarily your market. Yeah. It could be Chicago, it could be New York, it could be anywhere, it could be Europe. And so it's taking the time to just identify those things. And it takes work, I mean, I hate to say it.
And trial and error.
Trial and 110%. I mean, it doesn't matter how long you've been doing this. I'm constantly like learning and kind of revamping things. And like you said, sometimes you gotta try it and you gotta see how it works and then make adjustments from there. So it's just the one thing they don't like to talk about, I think. I think there might be there's hesitation around it.
Well, I think there's probably some gray area, right?
Yeah.
Because depending on the type of art you're talking about, the unmet need that you're trying to meet for somebody to purchase whatever you make could be significantly different. Even just as a photographer, there's 1,000 different things that people might end up purchasing because you're a photographer. And then when you span that across all of the arts, that's a really nebulous zone.
Yeah, and going back to what you mentioned earlier, because I didn't really touch base on it, they're definitely you need to explore, right? Like your medium and your theme and your style, and that takes time. You can't rush that either, right? And I've tried to rush it. Like I've tried to kind of push it because I'm like, I'm ready to rock and roll, but then realizing like I couldn't, right? That takes time. But as you're developing that, it is taking time to learn how to write about yourself, right? Your artist biography. Learn how to write about your artwork, your artist statement. Start building your artist resume, right? Which we call, your artist CV. Like there's these certain things that are important that need to be happening at the same time while you're developing maybe your style, your voice, right? When it comes to the actual art. And then, like you said, how can I make it so it's also, I guess, sellable, right? I guess would maybe be the right word. And that's tricky, right? That's a tricky thing.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, you mentioned the artist's story. I think that's part of it, right? I think that's probably the driver in a lot of instances of someone that ends up purchasing art is the story behind it, right? Like
absolutely. Yes.
And if you can't tell that story, you miss out on that whole chunk of people that might buy your stuff.
Preach. Let's get into that more. No, you really just touched on another really important subject matter is, being able to not just talk about yourself as an artist, but talk about your work, but also, I mean, we've all seen it. I was joking on Threads, I don't know, a couple weeks ago about, I'm like, can we get past these artist statements that are so over the top that, like, you know what I mean? Like, you read them and I'm like, my eyes just like roll back into my head because it's too much, right? It's like, that's not the average person. Even artists, like, don't even understand some of the jargon that's being put out there. And that's what's really important is being able to connect, right, with your collector. And let's be realistic, right? The majority of us aren't operating at that Sotheby's, like, like New York, gallery 1%, right? We're dealing with, the general public. So how can you share your story, your vision, right? And what you do in a way that is relatable, but also, understandable. And that takes time as well. That's not something that, you can just write in an afternoon. That takes time. You should constantly kind of be honing that and revisiting that. So but you're right, because sometimes if the work isn't necessarily, somebody may feel a connection to the work and be like, oh, I like that. And then maybe the story behind either the artist or the work is that final little kicker that makes that person purchase it. Right.
Yeah. I think that whole dynamic is fascinating to me. A scenario from last summer sticks out. I went to they do that big art show in Ashwaubenon, right on the river. I can't remember what it's called, but I went there last year, trucking through it, pushing my son through it in a stroller. And oftentimes, like when I think about the art type of stuff that I've purchased in the past, it's because I've talked to the person and the story resonates with me. But in that day, I was walking through there and it stinks because I can't remember the name of the artist, but I walked past a booth and she was a painter and I actually didn't even get to talk to her. It was her sister or something that was in the booth. And it was striking. Like her style was unbelievable. What you were just talking about, like the piece connected with me immediately. Yes. And I still remember it. There were several different kinds, but her theme was like black and white with a colored image. The ones I liked were animals in it. Yep. And I remember this blue jay like looking at me through this, and I was like, oh my goodness, I want to buy that so bad. Yeah. And apparently I wasn't the only one because it was very, very expensive, like way outside of my budget. Like there were thousands and thousands of dollars. Yeah. But I was like, I get that immediately. Like somebody's going to do that because I don't always feel like this. I know that. Like as a non-artist, at least in that realm, immediately that thing jumped out at me and I was like, man, I got to have that if I can get it. Yep. And then I found out the price and I was like, oh my goodness, I can't do it, but somebody will. I know it.
Yeah. And it's interesting you bring that up so first of all, obviously the connection, right? And I'm the same way, right? For the majority of us who aren't like collecting Picassos, right? And Monets and Manets, right? Where they're doing it for investments, it goes into a crate, right? It goes into storage and then they wait, and it goes to auction. That is obviously, again, the majority of us aren't dealing at that level. Yeah. We're collecting artwork because we feel something, right? It makes us feel something, and you may not know exactly what it is, but there's a connection there. Now, what's interesting about what you said, and I think is a really great kind of teachable point, is that you fell in love with it, but then you saw the price. And it was, right? It was just out of your budget.
It was way, yeah.
So my question for you, if you remember, did that particular artist have reproductions there of that work?
Yeah.
Okay, good.
She did, yeah.
Good.
And those are still expensive.
Okay. Okay.
And I got that too. But yeah, it was past the point where I was willing to spend for what I would have gotten out of it. Like, it was beautiful.
Yeah.
And her theme was so awesome. So someday, if I, end up falling into a bunch of money, I'm definitely going to know. But I think her sister was telling me one sold for like $30,000.
Oh,
it was a ton.
Yeah.
And I wish I remembered her name just to like at least throw a shout out or something.
And that's going to be obviously, that's a very specific market, right? Yeah. If your original artwork is at 30,000, you're obviously narrowing down, right, your buyers. And these are all things to think about. And, it's interesting that you said even the reproduction's really expensive. Do you remember?
Several $100.
Okay. Yeah. And, and that's something that I teach as well, because, when an artist makes an original piece and it sells, that's one sale. Right. But and not all work can be reproduced, but if you can, reproduce your work, so you can do reproductions, right? You can, and there's lots of different ways to do prints. That helps bring in, right, a collector that may fall in love with your original, but can't afford you at this time. And so it is important that artists think of these different levels, right, of entry into their artwork. And that's something that, again, that kind of comes down to your right marketing, and the business side is how can I connect with my collectors at different phases. Yeah. So and it's an important thing to think about for sure.
So what was yours in your career as a photographer? What were some of your niches that you were successful in doing, and how did your business succeed?
Well, I was in the wedding industry and people, right? Portraits from the weddings. I would do, maternity shots. My clients obviously would get pregnant, right? And then I'd, be doing maternity shots. I did engagement sessions. Just from doing weddings, I ended up working with a lot of small business owners as well. Going in, and because we had worked right in the wedding industry, and then a lot of them, maybe they start out catering, and then next thing you know, they're opening up a restaurant. So, I'm going in and I'm photographing, the restaurant, the food, them, right? The chef, all that kind of stuff. So you name it, kind of different avenues. Fashion was a big thing that out west where which I love. I do miss that, is working with the Portland Institute of Art Institute of Portland, and going in and providing their senior fashion graduates with a photo shoot. Now, they still had to set it up, right? They had to get their models. They obviously had the clothing that they designed for their senior show, and they got a photo shoot, and they got to see what it was like to work on set with a professional photographer and make sure, right, that everything kind of came together. So that was really fun. I think that was another really great way to, again, the arts side, there's a lot of crossover within the arts, and as artists, you should have different people kind of in your pocket, right? That are friends or colleagues that you refer out, but you also work with. So, videographers, photographers, right? Graphic designers, web designers, all those different things are important, I think, that you have connections with. Right.
Yeah.
So, I loved, the fashion part was fun because it's very creative and But I mean, definitely, I love photographing people, because so many people are afraid to be in front of the camera.
Mm-hmm.
They equate it. So a lot of people equate it to like going to the dentist, and I'm like, really? I was like, I don't think this is like going to the dentist. But they have that fear, right? Because it is very vulnerable situation to be in, right? You're having your photo taken, and my job was and is to make people feel comfortable and to make them look their best, and let's have fun doing it. So, yeah, it's something that I've always enjoyed. So
I think it's the permanence of it. I think that's what makes it.
You think so? Yeah.
That's my guess anyway.
Yeah.
I think when we moved into this studio, it was kind of an interesting like human case study, because in my last studio, if that's what's in, if it's the environment, that was as intimidating as it gets. I had two like big lights shining right down on the table. Nice. The cameras were immediately there, and it's like, the whole time you're on camera. And I had a couple people like lock up a little bit, like
right,
like that. And this is a little more not like that, like we're looking at each other, and the mic is just off to the side a little bit. But yeah, I don't know. I think that was always my guess anyway. And even in even working in radio a long time, like I can't count how many people came in. I am so nervous.
Right? I bet, right? Yeah.
But if it's not something you do all the time, like I would be nervous to probably like try to paint something and show somebody, because it would be terrible. Like it wouldn't if I did it.
Absolutely. And I mean, I think the thing, it's with anything, right? Where if you haven't done it before, there's nerves involved because you don't know what's going to happen, right? Like how is it going to unfold? And I guess I encourage any creative, if there is something that you're kind of fearful of, then just go dive into it. If you want to work with galleries and that's the route you want to go, learn more, right? Go attend shows, go to different opening receptions, enter call for arts, just get into that world and understand, you'll start to understand more of how it works. Mm-hmm. And it's important. It's important because otherwise you're believing all these misconceptions that are being put out there by other artists who maybe had one bad experience and now that's all that, mm-hmm. they talk about. Yeah. And that unfortunately happens a lot, I feel like, within the arts.
Sure.
So I'm trying to also dispel those things, right? And be like, no, this isn't, that's their experience, but this isn't how the whole, mm-hmm. Sector works, right?
One story doesn't tell the whole tale.
Absolutely. Yeah. And with any business, right, there's always going to be crappy people, right? There's always going to be somebody who's going to take advantage of you, or, they're not coming from, an honest place. But for some reason with the fine arts, it's really just like, kind of focused on, and the galleries are the bad guy. And I'm like, well, no, actually they're not.
Everybody needs an enemy.
I guess, right? I guess. So yeah.
So I think that probably gets us to the $1 million question.
Uh-oh.
So you moved out west to get away from the Minnesota winters.
Yes, that's
and
right.
You came right here to Green Bay.
I did come back to Green Bay. It was life was moving me back home I grew up in Door County. Okay. So, born in Milwaukee, grew up in Door County, and, just some life circumstances were just like, you got to get back home. So that's already going to be 8 years this June. So that's kind of been crazy. It's been interesting. It's been, I think, difficult just because as soon as I came back, I definitely was searching for that kind of creative community and support that I had right out west, thinking that, that's everywhere. And then very quickly realized that's not the case. Mm-hmm. And that's why I talk about it as a lot, is because if you are living somewhere where you do have a group of people who are supportive, right, who are cheering you on, who, have that crazy entrepreneur mindset, just as you, and don't feel threatened, like honor that time, right? Because it's not going to stay forever. And it's not like that everywhere. And I think that's also a big part of my driving force of just really trying to support the arts and support artists, because there's so much talent in Wisconsin. There's so much talent, but, you know, and I don't know if you know this, we're 50th in the United States for funding for the arts and culture.
I have heard that. Yeah.
That's disturbing.
What is that? I've heard
Yeah.
that stat. What does it mean?
Yeah.
Like what type of, what are we missing that others have, I guess you'd say?
Well, our politicians don't believe that it's important, what I understand is what it comes down to. So they're not actively going after those funds.
So what does funding for the arts look like? Like for
Yeah.
buildings or like groups or
Yeah.
what does that turn into?
Well, I think, the majority of us understand it always goes to the larger organizations first,
Right.
right? So museums obviously are going to get it. Museums, theaters, and a lot of them, obviously, you have to remember, support them as well, whether it's a membership or a donation, because even the funds that they may be getting from, federal government are typically not enough, right, to support their programming and all the things that they're doing and staff and stuff like that. So it is really important that we do support the arts no matter what, right? And all the stats are there. You can just go Google it. I'm not good with remembering that kind of stuff, but it brings in millions of dollars, right, into the state every year. So why aren't we continuing to support this? You'd have to, dig more into asking, I think, our leaders in that sector. Why aren't you guys going after, these funds that are available?
Yeah.
Yeah.
And when you think about it, not something that's really crossed my mind, but I mean, you said you were born in Milwaukee. I lived in Milwaukee for quite some time, and the Milwaukee Art Museum's awesome, but that's
amazing. Yeah.
That's what you think about in the art realm in Wisconsin is for me. I would guess there's something in Madison, but I don't know what it is.
Yeah. I mean, off the top of my head, I know Madison is kind of this weird pocket where I feel like they don't, from what I've been told, there's not really a lot of independent galleries there, if any. And then I know they might have a couple museums, but they don't really stand out. I think the two that are really, making a lot of impact are obviously, Milwaukee, but MOA, which is right outside of Milwaukee. So both in, that area. And then we have a lot of really great smaller.
What was that one? What is it?
Museum of Wisconsin Arts. They're in West Bend, Wisconsin. So another, supporting. Yeah.
For a long time?
Yeah, I think so. Yeah, since I've been, So
I worked in West Bend for quite some time.
Oh,
used to live close to West Bend. Never heard of it.
Really? Crazy.
Wild.
It's like a triangle-shaped building right by the river, that little stream downtown.
I am getting older. Maybe it wasn't there when I was there. You never know.
I'm not sure. Yeah, when they put up that space, but that's a great organization, and they're working really hard. Obviously Door County, which is just 45 minutes away from us, is obviously rooted in arts and culture. Mm-hmm. So we do have this pocket that's right there that really embodies that. And a lot of times at that grassroots, level, right, with theater and musicians and the arts. So, we are fortunate to have that, but it's not enough.
Yeah.
It's not enough. And
that is an important call out about Door County. The Door County Auditorium is a very nice spot.
Yeah.
One of my favorite artists is Jason Isbell, and I remember I went to the Door County Auditorium to see him when he was his career was fledgling. It was in its early stages, and that was an awesome spot.
Yeah, cool. Yeah. I mean, I think the Miller Museum is a little hidden gem right in the Door County Library. They're doing a really great job. Helen will give a shout out to her, the curator, but she's also came from out of state, right? She came, and so she has a wealth of knowledge within kind of the arts and is really trying to bring diversity into their shows and their exhibitions. And it's important that we really, that's the thing too. It's I think we need to be recruiting people, that are maybe from urban areas outside of Wisconsin to bring in that cultural aspect to help develop it and grow it. That's important too. We need to be welcoming to that, right? Because, I think a lot of talent in Wisconsin ends up leaving, right? So how can we keep the talent here? So there needs to be more opportunities within the arts and culture sector, I think.
Well, it's like a lot of other things, right? If there's another place that you have a better opportunity to do what you love doing, you're probably going to go. Yeah, right?
For sure.
I mean, unless something ties you to an area or something, you're going to go where opportunity calls.
Yeah. Yeah. So, why aren't we creating more opportunities here? Right. I think is really kind of the big question. And I think some of that does tie into being, 50th, right, for funding in the arts, where I don't know what the stats were for last year, but, we're surrounded by, I think, like the top 5. I know at least Minnesota and Illinois are in the top 3, right, where they're getting all this funding. So, yeah, it's things like that. I mean, 50th, really? Like Alaska? Alaska is better than us? I mean, like, you have all these states that are supporting the arts better than us. I think more people need to be aware of that, so, yeah.
And it seems, there's pockets, right? And
of course,
What is that, I don't know if it's a festival or what's that thing that happens in the summer where they paint all the murals on?
Oh, yeah.
I think is it on, maybe it's an on Broadway thing or something?
Yeah, I think on Broadway obviously is doing a great job, giving opportunities to artists. So public art is a really important, right, sector, I think, for all communities. The more
it shines a spotlight on it,
yes,
right? Yeah,
absolutely. Who doesn't want to drive around and see a pop of color or something interesting?
Beautiful murals, yeah.
So I don't know if this is their 3rd or 4th year. I don't know if they're going to do it again. We won't plug that in case they're not. Yeah,
just in case.
We don't know, but if they are, it's little things like that also are helping, right, give our local artists opportunities.
Yeah.
And those things are really important. Yeah.
So do you feel like you've made progress?
As far as
with the Art Connective and what do you say? It's been like 4 years?
Well, 5 years now.
Okay.
Yeah. As far as what? Narrow that down. Like as far as
like those two missions come together, right? You're trying to support artists.
Yep.
And you're trying to do it in this community. So by de facto, you're part of the driving force trying to bring that to the forefront. Do you feel like you've made progress?
Whew. The progress that I would like to have made, no.
Yeah.
I'll be honest about it. I definitely feel like, and this is something I've struggled with moving back here. I'm definitely the kind of person who wants to implement and put things into action. Right. And I think what I've met and what I've encountered, there's just unfortunately a lot of people who just maybe want to talk about it and that's it. I'm like, well, we can talk about it, but if we're going to talk about it, let's do something about it. Right. I'm like, otherwise, why are we talking about it? And I think that's a big issue within the state. And then there's a lot of divide. And then even within organizations, like we were talking about earlier, there's that I need to protect, right? Maybe whatever they feel like their secrets are. And again, that's the wrong way to approach it. So it's very slow moving. It's slow moving, right? And then also I think a lot of artists are scared, right? Scared to, I was reading a book last night. It's like to be an artist it's a very courageous thing, right? And we don't talk about that a lot, but with that, it's courageous because you're, like we talked about, you're putting yourself out there, right? Whatever you create is part of you, and you're exposing that very intimate part of you, right, to the public. And there's the possibility of criticism or that people aren't going to like it or whatever it is. And so our instinct is to not do that, right? As humans. We don't want to do that. But more than ever, we need artists to be voicing, right? Whatever it is that they want to talk about. And, any kind of artist, right? Musicians, theater, fine arts. We really, really need that right now, I think, right? Yeah. We just look out into our climate. It's a little hazy out there.
Hence the Connective, right?
Yeah. So, the long answer is it's slow moving. Yeah.
That's a really valid point, though. That's really valid, and that's a lot of the mission actually with Rooted Wisconsin, is because I think there's connection in all different types of like you can communicate in a lot of different ways, right? A painting, a photograph communicates.
Yep.
It's the similar concept.
Yep.
And like I've had a lot of people say like, hour and a half, 2 hour episodes, like that's really long. How do you capture eyes that long? And I'm like, there's a value in it, So I'm part of that. Where like, I'm creating something that I think is valuable.
Yep.
Could I immediately reach more eyes very easily? Absolutely. I know how to do it. But is there the value there that I'm contributing to something that I believe in and connecting that concept that you were just talking about? Like it's gray out there in some places, like it's kind of like, social media is a weird space sometimes.
Yes, it is.
And like
yes,
just
it is.
Life in general is very strange about how we interact and how we mainly empathize with each other, I think.
That's a good point. Yep.
Is really unique. And I think that the more 2 hour conversations we have, the better we are off as
Definitely.
A society.
Yeah.
Because there's common ground for almost everyone, but we don't think about it very often,
Yeah, and it's a really good point to make. I think I just did a podcast not too long ago about everyone's an expert nowadays because we have, right? You have a cell phone and a camera and you have social media and you can just start, spewing whatever it is that you feel, you want to talk about. But that's scary because like we were talking about before we started the podcast, I use the example, just because you got married and planned a wedding doesn't make you a wedding coordinator, right? And you can use kind of that example into lots of different fields, I think, especially with the arts. But, with all this access to all these different types of social media, anyone can kind of claim to be an expert. And you have a lot of people who want to do certain things who are getting misguided advice, right? Because like you said, you're only seeing like a minute or 2 minutes, and you don't know all the backstory. Like you need more time to dig into stuff. Like you said, we need to have more in-depth conversations, right?
People will make a judgment about an entire human after seeing them talk for 30 seconds.
Right. Or reading, right? Or like reading a thread, right? Or like it's just text, like, and we're so quick to judge. We're so quick to, make assumptions. It's really like you kind of have to just step back, and there needs to be more homework, right? I think on all of our parts, if you're learning from people online, right? Or wherever, because we don't know. You don't know. Yeah. It's interesting for sure.
It is.
Yeah.
So tell me about your podcast.
I have a podcast. Again, I started that during the pandemic because I had to shut down the gallery. Like, I had to close the gallery for a good 3 months right after I took it over. So that was a really interesting journey. And
sweet timing.
Right. Tell me about it. And I was like, I'm going to start a podcast. And so, I'm in my 4th year already. I really just, like if a topic comes up, I'm like, I need to talk about that. I don't really have a set schedule. So it's important to subscribe because they randomly drop. But again, really focused on going into more depth about, like you said, like these certain topics that can't really just be talked about in a post, right? Or in a couple sentences. Let's dig into these topics more that, again, is really geared towards artists and specifically kind of operating within the business side of it.
Got it.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. So it's fun. Yeah, I don't have a fancy setup like this, but it's fun. And I'm starting to bring on guests as well, who I think it's always good to have. It's funny. I made a post the other day. It's like, sometimes I feel like I'm beating my head against a brick wall trying to get through to artists, because also you have to remember, like, a lot of artists have very big egos, right? And they feel like they know. But then they're struggling, and then they're not wanting to make these changes. So I'm just like, oh my God, I'm like, just kind of just be open, right? Just be open to receiving. So bringing in different people within the industry that are out of this area. I'm starting to do that as guests. And so I have a reoccurring guest, LMNOP Art, which she's down south, and we're just like, I don't even know how we connected. I think he reached out to me, but we have a lot of the same, like, yep, we've been through that. We've experienced that with artists. And so it's nice to kind of have that person be like, yes, kind of reconfirming this is how this world operates. Yeah.
Creative name, LMNOP. It's the best part of the alphabet.
Yeah.
So it's like a super creative name.
Yeah, definitely. So, it's a little bit of just, it's a weird field.
Oh yeah.
The fine arts is kind of this weird sector of business, and it's just important. For me, it's important to like talk about it because it's not talked about, right? Like, I feel like there's like this, it's like this veil and there's like all this stuff happening behind it. And I'm like, you know what? We're going to pull it back and we're going to talk about it, whether you like it or not. So I feel like that's a big part of what I'm doing as well.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Is that that's the barrier to success for a lot that you see?
I think, yes. Yeah. Not understanding kind of the basics that are needed to gain access to opportunities. Mm-hmm. Absolutely. Yeah.
I completely understand that from a bird's eye view. I have I would have no idea where to start. Like,
right. Yep.
Other than the classic stuff like identifying your audience and knowing what you have and offer and stuff like that. Like,
oh, but you're already ahead of the game then if you're doing that.
I guess. Yeah.
That's your marketing background.
The marketing piece I could do. Yeah.
Yeah.
And I guess it's probably like a lot of other industries where the right type of intentional networking probably means a lot, right?
Definitely. It's building relationships, right? Like with anything. And, I think unfortunately a lot of our most talented creatives are introverts, right? Mm-hmm. And for them then getting out it's a little daunting. It's a little bit intimidating and it can be scary. And I get that. But you do still need to interact with your artistic community, right? And not just going to events that are about you or for you, but also supporting your fellow artisans, right? And from there, connections can be made, right? I always loved it at the opening receptions at the gallery because I love seeing all these people interact and get to know each other, and you don't know what's going to come from that. So that in-person interaction is obviously still really important. I know there's so much weight that artists put on social media, right? But it's always a reminder, get off of that and get and interact in person and go to different events and interact, right, with the community and learn, and talk with them, right? And learn what they like about your art or what they don't like. That's really, really kind of your first step.
Yeah. Super interesting talking about this today. Yesterday, completely by happenstance, I ended up walking through a small art, I don't know what you would call it.
Like an installation?
It was a bunch of artists selling their art.
Oh, okay, like a pop-up event,
like
maybe?
Like a pop-up market.
Oh, was that TC?
Yeah.
Oh, yeah. I think I saw that on social media. On social?
Yeah.
I saw that on social media.
Yeah, so I walked through, and kind of that concept you're talking about really stands out because I if something caught my eye for Mother's Day, I probably would have bought it.
Yeah.
Coming up.
Yep.
If something like I thought my wife would dig or something, like I would have bought it. But hearing you say that, and I didn't really think about it till now, but like I'm picturing through my mind walking through there, and there were probably maybe 15 to 20 artists in there, I would say.
Okay.
And I walked through and I like checked out every table, and I would say 3 of them said anything to me, right?
Yes.
So conceptually, that's kind of what you're getting at, right?
Good topic, yes.
Yeah. Which is, a long history of marketing says,
did they greet you? What did they, like, were they just kind of like, hello? How did they approach you? Or,
fascinating question. So the one that did by far the best, greeted me as I walked up.
Okay.
She did wood burning on these really cool pieces of wood. And we've needed a new cutting board also.
Oh,
so
yeah.
She had these really neat cutting boards, but I didn't have to ask one question about her stuff. Like, she told me her entire process.
Okay.
I learned that she also teaches classes. If I want to learn how to woodburn, like, she did an awesome job. She had this personal brand elevator speech ready that was like 3 minutes. Awesome.
Yep.
If she would have had bigger cutting boards, I would have bought one. I just, they
Yeah.
were too small for what I need.
Yeah.
She did by far the best. And the other two were just kind of like a very half-hearted acknowledgement, like hi type thing.
Yep.
So when you think of what that scenario brings, the booth before hers had cutting boards as well. One was bigger, but I didn't like their art as much as hers. Hers was very well done in my eye.
Yep.
But the other person didn't say anything to me. So, like, that has to be a large part of just coaching too. Like, have that elevator speech ready.
Oh my gosh. You bring up such good points. So based on that experience, right, out of all those artists, that one's going to stand out to you, correct? Right?
It's the only one I remember.
Absolutely. Okay. So artists listening, watching, whatever, like right there, like here's a consumer, right? Here's somebody who wanted to purchase, and there's 15 other people there, and one, right, really interacted with you. That's something, again, it's so important. Like, even if you are nervous, even if you are scared, there has to be some interpersonal skills, right? And especially if you're getting out and you're doing art fairs and you're doing pop-up events and booths, which I definitely recommend, because it's a great way to learn kind of which price points are doing well, right? What different mediums people are drawn to, all that kind of stuff, and learn about, your buyers and your collectors. But with that, I've seen it so many times, and I've talked about it before, is you can't just hide in the back corner of your booth, right, and just expect sales to happen. You have to have some sort of, like meet and greet and just make people feel welcome, right? Because the arts are intimidating. I mean, they are. I mean, walking into a gallery or a museum, it can be intimidating and kind of overwhelming because you feel like maybe you don't know enough about it. But when you have someone that greets you and is welcoming and is friendly, that can really kind of take down your guard, right? And make you feel comfortable. And so it's important. So artists, make your buyers feel comfortable, right? Maybe that's the takeaway.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah.
Well, and I think part of it is an easy thing to know to maybe break down that barrier is that oftentimes, like in that environment, everybody feels awkward. It's an awkward thing to do.
For sure.
Like
for sure.
the person on the other side of the table feels just as awkward as you do.
Yes.
And I mean, I'm by nature pretty extroverted and I'm comfortable talking to most people, but I still feel awkward a lot. But everybody feels awkward. It's cool.
Absolutely. And it's as simple as being like, hey, how's it going?
Yeah.
And, you're just breaking through that and you don't know then where the conversation is going to go next. I've told, artists, like, you should be like physically and mentally exhausted after doing like an art fair.
Oh, goodness. Yeah.
Because you've talked to so many people, versus just kind of sitting there in the corner. I know for me, I'm interacting, with I'm trying to, but I'm sure a lot of that comes from just my years and years of retail experience as well. You want to make people feel comfortable.
Yeah.
I want people to feel comfortable. If they have questions, they can ask me. I had a woman last year at the Sturgeon Bay Art Fair come into my booth, and she was looking at some pieces, and, and sometimes you also have to gauge people, like, if give them space when needed, interact. It's like this weird kind of like play, right? You have to know the difference. And, she was just really kind of like soaking everything in, and I was just letting her be. And then I greeted her, and then next thing I know, she started, she was looking at the piece, and it had like a butterfly in it, and it had like this old skeleton key. And she started like tearing up. And I was like, oh boy, like I didn't know what was going on. And the piece resonated with her so much, it took her back, I think, to a childhood.
Like a place in time.
Yeah. Like a childhood home or in a memory with her mom, who I'm assuming was no longer around. And it brought up so much emotion that she literally just like walked away. And it was a really unique.
She didn't even buy it?
No, she didn't. Yeah, because I told her, I'm like, well, it's meant to be yours, right? Like, if you have that strong of a connection. Ironically, I think she was so overwhelmed with emotion, she just like walked away.
Oh, yeah.
And somebody else ended up buying it.
She didn't come back to get it though?
I think it just kind of pushed her.
I mean, who knows? It could have been from like a place of trauma too.
I don't know, right? Because we didn't dig into it, but it's so it was a really interesting experience. Yeah, but yeah, the piece sold to somebody else. Yeah. But but those are moments that obviously she's going to remember that. I'm going to remember that. And it's also, I think, telling how when you're out in public like that and you're making those connections, you're also learning, right, what's resonating with your audience as far as your work. And that's rewarding in itself.
Oh, for sure. And helps you create more.
Yeah, absolutely. So, yeah, it's an interesting journey.
Yeah, for sure. Fascinating field, like everything we've talked about so far. Just it's so unique, I think, is a great way to put it. I think you mentioned something about it earlier about how no two paths are the same.
Absolutely.
As an artist.
Yep.
So like trying to pave your own. I think that's probably why it ties so much to entrepreneurial, right? Because there's no set path for you to begin with anyway.
Right.
So you have to be cut from a certain cloth, and you have to be able to create something that speaks to people in one way or another.
Yes.
And I mean, everybody probably has that skill, but very few have it identified, I would say.
Yeah, that's a good point. That's a really good point. Having that skill, but then taking the time to identifying it. Yeah. And I think that's something that comes, again, with time, right? It's not straight out the gate. And as an artist, you're kind of in this, at least I am, kind of always pushing myself. And, for me, I get I'm like, okay, I've worked this particular medium or theme, to the point that it no longer really interests me. And then I move on to something else. I'm kind of like that. I know not all artists are. But I think that's what's really interesting about what we do, is because it's like, in order for us to create, it has to really come from a place of wanting to do it, right? Of needing to get whatever that energy is out and into, right, the medium that you're working with. So it's very, I mean, it's fun. I think being an entrepreneur is fun, right?
To me, it is absolutely. I'm sure some people like shiver thinking about it and like go hide in the corner. But
I mean, like, who doesn't want to be your own boss? Like, you get to tell yourself what to do and when to do it. And to me, I think that's fun, because I think circling back to, just coming back here, how things move like a little bit slower. I think part of being an entrepreneur too is like, when you want to implement something, you can implement it, right? You don't have to go through this chain of commands, to see if they think it's okay, right? That's the beauty of following your passion, doing something you love is, if you want to do a podcast today at noon, let's do a podcast today at noon, right? And that's something that I think I value as an entrepreneur, is kind of that freedom, right? But then with that freedom, you're also a lot of times working a lot longer. You know what I mean? Yeah.
Oh, that comes with the territory, right? I'm sure people in the history of entrepreneurship have started a business thinking it was going to provide them all kinds of free time, and
not
almost
the case.
all the time it's anytime I've ever been an entrepreneur, I've put way more time than I've been recuperated.
Yes.
As opposed to like when I was working for someone.
Absolutely.
That inverse correlation doesn't happen the way you think it would. Like, you work more being an entrepreneur almost all the time. Yeah,
definitely. But then, it's like, but you're doing that because you love what you're doing.
Yeah, hopefully.
Yeah. That's the goal, right? Or one would think. So, it's that give and take where I think a lot of people in the 9-to-5 sector are just, it's soul sucking for a lot of people, especially if you're creative, and we're all creative in one way or another. So, I think that's why so many artists want to get out of that 9 to 5, and want to follow their passion and whatever it is that brings them joy, right? Mm-hmm. And I'm a big supporter of that, right? But also realistic that it's not going to happen overnight. Like, don't go quit your job, like, please don't do that. And there needs to be, planning and thought put into it. Yeah.
It's fascinating. It's fascinating to think about even back to your answer of, do you feel like you've made progress over the 8 years, and to have to, there was a significant
pause
thought around that, right?
Yeah.
And I have to think a lot of artists feel that way. I don't know. That's an interesting thing to think about. Another question I do have, though, is I think I remember seeing on your social media the brick and mortar place is no longer, right? Like, you don't have the gallery
correct.
anymore?
Yep.
Okay.
That closed last June, and everything now is online. Yep. So so whether it's on Instagram, Threads, Facebook, TikTok, all those, Instagram's kind of my main go-to as far as sharing information. But then the website has resources for artists as well. So I have online courses they can enroll in. I have downloadable PDFs. I have membership options. So I have all these different ways that they can learn, depending on what they want to learn, right? And then I do offer portfolio reviews as well, where I'm not so much reviewing your artwork. I mean, I am a little bit, but it's more so looking at what I'm seeing from an outside, like, business perspective, right? So I'm looking at your website, I'm looking at your social, and then, of course, the art that's within that. And then being like, right off the bat, I have this weird thing where I can just, like, I'm kind of like this problem solver, I've realized over the years, where I'm like, okay, these are the things that you're kind of missing, right? Because as an artist, you're so entrenched in things, even your own artwork, that stepping back sometimes is essential, but it's also, when you're an entrepreneur, you need an outside set of eyes to be like, you're missing this really core thing, right? Like, you don't have a picture of yourself on your website. Like, what do you look like? Like, again, going back to what you said, like, wanting to learn and connect with this person who's making something. And so it's just like these simple tweaks a lot of times that are overlooked. So I help with that as well. So, and the nice thing about online is, the artist can live anywhere. I'm not just, stuck to the Midwest or to the Wisconsin area. So yeah, I'm getting artists from, like, all over the United States reaching out, which is fun. Like, I love being able to help and mentor. Right. Mm-hmm. So yeah.
Yeah. That's gotta be that. I mean, that has to be unique in itself, right? Because each situation is different. And it's a skill in itself to be at a point where you're comfortable critiquing not only the process but the art created. That has to lead to some really fascinating conversations.
It's more, like I said, I don't really focus on that as much. I focus more on. Like, recently I just did a review, and he's out east, and very, very talented oil painter. He has his craft down, right? He has his style down. He has that. But then with what he was showing on his site, it was too much, and he was kind of all over the place with his, themes, I guess what you could call it, right? So for an example, a theme could be, floral paintings. Another one could be more architecture or portraits. And, like, within the portrait sector, he only had a handful of pieces, and they weren't as strong as, let's say, his floral work. So I'm like, why are we even showing this? You know what I mean? Mm-hmm. So it's kind of simple stuff like that. Like, let's just remove that. And it's not where you're selling. It's, so why are we showing it?
Trying to force it.
Yeah. And just because you made it doesn't necessarily mean it should be put out there, And so that's part of it, is kind of honing in, right, on your strongest works and kind of how to, like, streamline what you're showcasing, because you don't have to show it all, right? There should be a little bit of mystery. You know, and again, these are things that, you know, I try to put into my own practice as well, because I'm guilty of, you know, at times, like I just, you know, there's too much. I have too much, right, on my website or whatever. So going back and streamlining it and narrowing it down and really just kind of focusing, right, on what I'm doing now, right? And that's a big thing too, is keeping things current.
That's a human nature thing too.
Right.
When I used to do more consulting marketing than I do now, everybody wanted everything in whatever type of content we were going to make.
Oh,
yeah. Like if it's a retail store, like we want this, or a restaurant, like special 7 days a week, make sure you put our phone number and website and email. And they're like, people are not going to listen to any of that. We need to, back to that concept actually you brought up earlier, if they remember one thing, what is that you want them to know? What's that one thing you want
So
them to
I
know?
have a question for you, because this was years ago that I read, and I know it's changed. So when it comes to marketing, I can't remember, gosh, this is probably going to date me. I remember reading it took like 3 passes or something before of somebody seeing something before they made like an action towards it, right?
Yeah.
What is that now? I feel like it's a lot more now, just because,
I don't know that there's any like solid research around that I would like believe, but I've heard wild numbers that, you know, 7 impressions, 12 impressions, 20 impressions. Like, I've heard a big old range. Yeah. But that's pretty common. Think about your purchase journey of things that you've bought. How many times have you bought something the first time you heard of it? Not very often.
Right. And that I think is really important for artists to understand is you need to keep sharing stuff, right? It may be old to you, but it's not to your followers or whoever. And so that's important, right? And then keeping your website up to date, obviously, talking about where you're going to be in person, things that are going on, that continued communication, because you don't know when that touch point is going to reach that buyer or that collector.
So think about the scenario I gave earlier with the cutting board, the wood burning woman who spoke with me.
Did you ask her for larger options?
I didn't. No, I didn't.
Shame on you.
I know. I should have. But
shame on you.
Flip it though. Think about how if she treats it as more of a sales opportunity. If I leave there with some type of call to action, like visit my website and see what I'll have or something like that.
Did she give you anything?
She didn't. No.
Did she have business cards or postcards or anything?
I don't know. I don't know. She was like wood burning as she was doing this.
Okay, so that's nice.
Yeah, it's cool. She's doing it in front of you.
Yep.
But think about then how that leads to more efficacy of more conversions. Like, okay, if I leave with that, next thing you know, I'm searching on the website when I get home.
Yes.
I already appreciate her because she's the only one that talked to me. If I find, an 8x12 cutting board that's on her website, I probably order, and that's the second touch point with them.
Absolutely, right.
I think that's probably the really hard part about making, not to get all businessy, but to make conversions at something like an art market or something. This concept you're talking about doesn't mesh with that, about how people buy. Like, that's impulse purchases, and that's a whole different ball game about how you influence impulse purchase than you do building a overall clientele.
No, please get all businessy, because artists need to hear this, right? I mean, essentially, that's what I'm talking about. So I think it's important that they're hearing it from somebody who is in marketing, right? And who's someone who you wanted to buy, right? And even though you had enough conversation with her that she should have given you something. Mm-hmm. You know what I mean? Like, at least to follow you, like business cards are still valuable, you guys, you know, sure. They really are. And having those takeaways, right? Where either they can grab it. Like, so what if I'm walking by and she's busy talking to you, but maybe I'm on a time crunch? At least I can see something and I can pick it up and walk away with it and do more research. Yeah. Again, like you said, it's another touch point. And I think artists, they need to start thinking that way, right? You need to start, you've got the creative side down. You guys are doing great at that. But now you need all the things we're talking about. You have to figure out how to start implementing them, right? And like you were talking about, think of the way you shop right now. How many passes it takes, right, before and how you purchase and where you purchase, you have to think about the same thing with your art. You know? Absolutely. Yeah. Yeah. I like the tables flip there. You ask, I like that. You're like, it's my podcast. They're coming out. Let me ask you some questions. I like that. Well, I appreciate you taking the time. Yeah. Did we just blow through like an hour? I mean. Over, I think. Yeah. Wow. I don't know exactly what. Look at that. Yeah. I normally try to do mine in 30 minutes or less because I'm just like, do people really want to keep listening to me? So yeah, I appreciate you putting in the time. Well, that's what works. I mean, even one of my favorite podcasters' name's Ryan Sickler, and he has a great podcast called The Honeydew, and that's an hour long. And now he made a new one called The Way Back. It's like 25 minutes. Yeah. I know he's doing it because to reach a different audience that won't listen for an entire hour. It's similar type of content. But, he does a great job, and I get it. I get why so many people do 30 minutes and less, because that's where we have short attention spans nowadays, right? Yeah. There's a reason why. Like, I mean, my wife and I even call it sometimes. Like, we call them 30-minute funny TV shows. Yeah. Like, just want to watch a 30-minute funny. Yeah. And just hammer it out. And not everybody wants the the 2-3 hours. And you got to do with what works too. But then do you only watch 1 30-minute? No, right? You end up going through that. At least I know I do. I'm like, okay, let's go to the next one. Let's go to the next. It depends on the day. I suppose. If you ask my wife, she would keep going all the time. Yeah. I am notorious for after the first one, if we do like another of the same show, I'm falling asleep. Oh. Almost guaranteed. Okay, interesting. I can sleep anywhere all the time. Like nice. I can fall asleep in this chair. Oh, right now, okay. Bro. So we don't very much because of that. Like, yeah. We would watch more and nice. Nice. I love it. You're like zonked out and she's just like binge watching. Yeah. Attention span is gone. If like as soon as like if there's an interim somehow and I don't like stand up and get a drink of water or something, I'm definitely falling asleep. Okay. Well, good to know. Hopefully nobody's falling asleep during our podcast today. Yeah. And thank you for staying awake. Yes. I love it. Yeah. Well, thanks for coming on. Thank you so much for inviting me. I really appreciate it. Where can people find your stuff? Yeah, artconnective.org is the website. On Instagram at the Art Connective, and that's the same handle for I think pretty much all the social media. Podcast, same thing, Spotify, Apple, wherever you listen to podcasts. So yeah, there's lots of good information out there. And typically I go live on Thursdays. So if I still have enough energy to talk after, I'll go live on my Instagram and I try to pick a topic and dig into it a little bit more, right? Because I'm giving all these little quick tidbits. So let's pick something. And I usually end up talking for about a half hour on a live. And sometimes I'll bring in people, we can split screen and they'll, talk with me. But yeah, it's another, again, we're extending the conversation, right? Yeah. Let's get into it more. Yeah. Because that's typically, we got to get to the meat of things. Yeah. Yeah. So it's fun. Cool. Thank you so much. Thanks.